Thank you for everyone who's been with us from the beginning and everyone who's joining us for the first time ever. We are excited to jump into Activism on tour. If you have not changed your chat settings, please do so and change it to all panelists and attendees so we know, who's communicating with us and how we can filter questions, etc., and answer all questions that come our way. We are happy to be joined by Espinoza, who was with us in personal finance last week. She is back with us today. And then, we've got our special guest who Adrian will introduce, and we are rocking our 35th webinar today. So here we go to kick off a new week and new topics and dive right back into it. So I'm going to pass it over to Adrian and we will kick things off today.
Thank you so much, Mark. Good morning, everyone. Before we dive into this very important topic, it just so happens that we had planned to talk about activism and the things that you can do on tour on this Monday morning. But before we dive into this topic, we need to remember a pioneer in our industry called Lori Tierney, who passed away just in the last week after a long battle with cancer. I want to talk a little bit about what Lori meant to our industry. She started out years ago. She graduated from Western State College. She came out of Denver. So she had a legacy at Red Rocks and she had a legacy with Barry Fay there. She worked for Show Power. And I'm going to really just give some bullet points of her amazing career, because what I want to end with was that Lori taught us about activism in our industry in a big way. She was, as director of the Production Alliance and as one of the founding partners of SOS, Satellite Office Services, she was Charlie Hernandez's left and right hand. She was a production manager. She did visas and immigration services. She was a leader and a friend to everyone. And one of the most important things that she did towards the end of her career was to partner with found an organization called Just a Bunch of Roadies, JBOR, as we know it in our business, that started to show us how we could do service on tour. And Lori taught us to look out for one another. She taught us to look out for our fellow man left and right in the cities that we impact by doing days of service. For everyone's edification, JBOR was one of the organizations that got a 747 jet filled with emergency medical supplies into Haiti before any other organization was able to do that. So thank you for listening. In the spirit of Lori Tierney, we launch our day today and we talk about how we can do good work and do good service on tour. And we have two amazing ladies. And again, Espy, nice to see you. Thank you for joining us this morning. Always great to have you. So Leah Holland, tell us about how you started and how you got into the business and a little bit about your trajectory, if you would.
Totally. So I grew up in the 90s in Eugene, Oregon, which was then the quote unquote anarchist capital of the United States. I think it's since lost that title, but I was always involved as a teenager in activism and like earth defense movements and stuff like that on the tail end of that time. And I started going to the Oregon Country Fair, which is our local shindig in the woods. It's large, it's been going on for 50 years, but most people haven't heard of it because it's pretty much a time capsule in a really beautiful way. And from there, I just continued to go to more festivals and get more involved and just kind of had an organizer's brain and also an activist brain from my upbringing and community. So it was odd, but also not odd in 2009 when I dropped out of college and ended up on a tour bus with, and I should just probably address this now, most of my career, I'd say at least half of my career, I've been involved with the Base Nectar Project, and I know that that's super fraught right now, and for important reasons. And I'm not going to focus there today, but I hopped on a tour bus with the Base Nectar Project, and given the artist's activist inclinations and also my own activist inclinations, we just started inviting local community orgs out to shows, and everything grew from there. It was pretty great.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Can you talk a little bit about Madison House Presents and sort of flesh that out for the folks?
Totally. So I worked with Bass Nectar for about 3 years as my first job, and then left that project, did a little bit of independent artist management and event production type stuff. That landed me at Madison House Presents in Boulder, Colorado. The Madison House brand is pretty legendary. One side of the business is a full service artist management agency, etc. The other side of the business, the Presents side on which I worked, is now owned by AEG, and they put on festival events like Electric Forest. They do the Forest Hill Stadium in Queens, New York, etc. It was a pretty cool outfit to be a part of. And during my time with them, mostly focused on the Electric Forest Festival, I was able to help found the plug-in program at that event, which was a fan engagement program. And activism really is just engaging and trying to make the world better in so many different ways. And I always viewed plug-in as an activist program of teaching fans how to be producers and empowering individuals to step up into an otherwise impermeable production. So that's pretty cool. And from there, I went on to return to Bass Nectar and found the Be Interactive nonprofit organization, which was funded by $1 per ticket from Bass Nectar shows. And I just departed that position this month. Amazing.
That's very cool. And can you talk about Fight for the Future a little bit?
Yeah, one of the things that I moonlight in addition to doing some festival marketing and branding and media team type work with, I do that with High Sierra Music Festival and with the Summer Meltdown Music Festival out in Washington State. I moonlight as an activist with the digital rights advocacy organization Fight for the Future. And one of the campaigns that you might have seen or heard of was the Ban Facial Recognition at Festivals campaign, which happened this past October. We were able to get almost every major music festival to say that they weren't using and wouldn't plan to use facial recognition technology on their patrons, which is TLDR, facial recognition turns the world into 1984. And from that campaign and through other campaigns like it, we've now arrived at a place where, also in large part thanks to the BLM movement, there's actually a bill in the House to ban facial recognition from federal use entirely.
What was your outreach like?
For the Fight for the Future, for the festivals campaign?
Mm-hmm.
That outreach involved emailing festival events and asking whether or not they use that technology. Live Nation had just purchased a facial recognition company that had issued a investor report talking about how they were going to start using FR for event entry in order to speed it up. And anybody who's worked in production knows that what slows down your entry isn't actually scanning a wristband, it's the search, or a ticket, it's the search. And AEG had also changed their terms of service to include biometrics, which includes facial recognition. And so we reached out and got stances from the organizations that would engage with us. We got organizations to make statements if they could. And then we put up a scorecard so that patrons would know who has and hasn't weighed in on this issue and who also might actively be using the technology. And from there, it was pretty bad PR for festivals to be on the wrong side of that scorecard.
Interesting. Did you find that the fans, that was something that the fans were engaged?
Yeah, there was, the festival crowd is often a pretty progressive crowd and pretty protective of their rights. So to know that that type of technology was being, could be brought and used to experiment on them and put their faces and information permanently in a database that could be accessed by law enforcement was, not something that patrons were interested in.
Well done. Thank you so much. And Lori, welcome.
Hello.
Hello. Good morning. Good day. So Lori, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, how you came upon the path that you're on, and what you're doing currently, what your main mission is these days.
Sure thing. So I actually did not come from a music background. While studying business and communications in college, I found myself really interested in corporate social responsibility and politics, just really looking at how those spaces are affecting our culture and the people and places around us. Through that, I, post-college, found myself looking for an outlet to engage with things that I loved. So I started volunteering for Headcount, which is an organization that registers people to vote at concerts and music festivals primarily, and landed a job there, moved to New York. And for about 9 years, I was at Headcount, grew to be the managing director. The basis of Headcount is basically working with volunteers across the country, working with bands and promoters, setting up a table and registering people to vote. But over the course of the time that I was there, we really grew beyond that. We had a lot of opportunity to take our experience as organizers and our experience as a nonprofit that had been setting up at concerts for a very long time, to turn that into a really positive experience for other organizations and amplify others as well. So we built out a program called Participation Row, where we brought other nonprofits in to music festivals and concert tours with us, worked with them very closely to increase engagement, drive the fans to the nonprofits, and work with them so they could talk about the work that they actually do and help support them with fundraising and covering their costs to be there.
I really hate to interrupt for just a second. If we were in emoji talk, I would be thumbs upping Participation Row. Just before you move on, that to me was a fantastic concept that I never even thought of. You know, we always, especially in festivals or even on tours that have concourse space in the arenas, we have room to bring more footprints for activations for important issues into our area. And you really yesterday kind of sparked in my own mind ideas about nooks and crannies where we could do so much. You know, we have so much space. So please continue, and then we'll come back to how we can put these things into place. I just, an emphasis there was needed.
Yeah, there was a lot of opportunity that we saw as an organization that had been setting up for years. We recognized that the nonprofit spaces on tours and festivals was sometimes the like sad, ugly child in the corner. And so we really wanted to rethink it and make it a very engaging, integral part of the festival, bringing the community in on these tours, making it a space that fans wanted to attend and engage with. And then also looking for ways so the organizations did not have to think about the fiscal responsibility of setting up, but actually focus on the great work that they're doing. So I worked at Headcount for about 9 years. As I mentioned, over that time, we raised over $5 million for other nonprofits through our Participation Row efforts, and registered over 200,000 voters. Headcount's still going strong. Even though we don't have a field campaign this year, they're still doing a lot of digital efforts. But I actually left Headcount about a year ago and now work for an experiential marketing agency, and am specifically focused on working to pull together some voter engagement efforts that we can pitch to our clients and encourage corporate America to get involved in making sure that we have everyone involved in our election process this year, which is going to be very crazy and new and different for everyone. So they can help drive a lot of change.
Amazing. So back to Participation Row for a second. Can you just briefly lay out the types of things that we would see on Participation Row? I just think that's so interesting because, you know, we've got vendor areas, we've got merch areas, we've got, you know, in festivals, there's all sorts of abilities to pick up, all kinds of tchotchkes and souvenirs and merch and what have you. Participation row sounds amazing. So if we could talk about the kinds of things we could populate in that area when we get out there again, that would be great.
Yeah, of course. So anytime we pull together a participation row, we work really hard to ensure that we have a variety of organizations that cover a variety of issues. The main concept for engagement at that space is that we work with the nonprofits to identify a single action that's engaging that they want a fan to take. Is it playing a game where you learn something about the work that the organization's doing? Are you trying to get people to sign petitions? We want it to be something beyond just building your email list or fundraising. And so we work with the nonprofits to create a fun activity. And then what we do is typically pull together some sort of raffle item where if a fan engages with, 3 to 5 organizations, depending on how many we have in participation row, they're entered in to win a prize or get a free item. And what you'll see there is a huge swath from the organizations that we all already see all of the time at concerts, your Conscious Alliances, your Oxfams of the world. But then also bringing in, there's the sweet little mom and pop, like grassroots local organizations. At Lock-In Festival, we had for years a couple of local small specialty schools that came out. The local humane societies would come out. Local environmental activations. You would see anything from people working with veterans, people working with disabilities, coming out and talking about the work that they do. And they oftentimes come up with some of the most exciting and really engaging activities. We work with them to think about who the audience is going to be. The activation that you're going to have at a Newport Folk Festival, where you're going to have families there, is going to be very different than the audience at a Grateful Dead tour or an Okeechobee. Like, thinking through how those attendees want to engage is really key to driving strong engagement from the audience and making sure that it's really a win-win for everyone.
Got it. Thank you for that. I don't want to go too far outside of what we cover here on TM 101. Yesterday we talked about briefly. I feel like it's a very important snippet to insert, although this is not touring related. Lori told us something yesterday that I feel like it's relevant just to pop over to. Can you tell us how you made an example of how retail spaces can turn into polling places and how public places, how you can become a polling place? This was very interesting, and let's just give this a quick snippet because it was very interesting, not about touring, but very interesting.
So in thinking about bringing in corporate entities to do voter engagement work this year, I've been speaking to a lot of people on the ground and trying to understand what their focus is this year. And one of the key things that they mentioned is that in this crazy weird election year, we are going to have a huge consolidation of polling places due to the coronavirus pandemic. Your polling place workers are typically over the age of 60, and your polling locations are places like schools and museums that do not want to be open to the general public. And that creates a huge accessibility issue. And so we started thinking about how you increase the number of polling places. And if you do the research, it's actually incredibly easy. The biggest thing is working with your local election officials. And the big rule is it can't be partisan. But that does not mean that it can't be branded. So as a person working in an experiential agency, we didn't have a lot, there's not a lot of opportunity to create experiences where you bring together a lot of people that's shined upon right now. Social distancing is very important. And so thinking about ways to create experiences at the polling place where you people are going to be gathering, making it a more positive experience is going to be a real game changer this year and a real opportunity for organizations and companies to tap into improving the election process this year. You know, what can we do to rethink standing in line at your local school where it's hot and stuffy and super boring? Can you rethink that experience, optimize it for social distancing, and make it something that also is great for your brand?
Right. Also, thank you for that. Thank you very much for that. Also, on top of mind, folks, top of mind voting. Also, just inserting one thing in, as Lori mentioned, most folks that go and volunteer at the polls are elderly and retired. And I suspect that those folks may not be available this year to do that. So you can go and sign up to be a poll worker. I do know people in LA that have done it.
I did. I just signed up, and you get paid. A lot of states pay you.
Yep.
And it's a, you know, it's, for us, it's a short day. Like, it's not a long day compared to what we're used to. And it's like a half day rate. It's not terrible. It's not great, but I mean, and we're logistics masters. I mean, we could run a polling place like crazy. So
yeah,
sign up.
I will.
So way to get out there.
I'll give a quick shout out that if you go to a thing called Power to the Polls, you can sign up and they will connect you directly with your local polling place and give you all the info you need to become a poll worker. So quick shout out for them.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that.
I never knew you got paid, actually. Like, I had heard everybody's like, oh, we should sign up to do it. And I was just like, I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, you get a little money too.
Yeah.
And we're not working.
Great.
So, yeah.
Gig.
Yeah. You know, what a good gig. All right. So moving on, Leah, I wanted to talk to you about, we talked yesterday about, and I think this is really good information for tour managers or anybody on a tour to be aware of. You know, if your tour has chosen to work with an organization, at the nonprofit, the 4 ways that a cause may get involved in a tour and how that can inform how you as the tour manager and your organization on the road can help deal with that. Like how to execute on the road and how to think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, you know, when you think about activism and touring, really it's a very broad umbrella. And the more or less the idea is that you are lending the platform of your tour to an organization, an individual, to anyone who is seeking to better the world. And that's super noble and fantastic, but there are effective and ineffective ways to do that. And a lot of that depends on how this organization or individual is coming to you and asking to participate, or if they're coming to you and asking to participate. So, you know, first and easiest is if the artist wants to do something for a cause, and this is becoming more and more common, where artists are recognizing that they have a huge microphone to affect social change and that they should really be out there doing that. And the second one is if, you know, your fans are coming to you and saying, please do something for this. You're, you know, playing in Chicago and there was just this huge, you know, like building collapse or something like that. Not to wish that on Chicago, but your fans are asking you to come and do something, and your artist is either interested or, you know, you, management, what have you. And then the third is if management or crew wants to do something. And then the final is, you know, if the organization reaches out to you and asks to participate. So I think that in any of these circumstances, the most important thing to begin with is to look at what you're actually able to offer to that organization or cause and make sure that participating with you will actually be beneficial to that nonprofit, because as Lori said, there's a lot of resources, time, organizing energy that they have to put into having a presence at your event. And if that, and that just needs to be really respected. So, you know, what is the tangible goal here? If it's fundraising, a lot of times, you know, going out and having like collecting donations in a jar is not going to be super effective at an event crowd. But if they have a petition If they're, wanting to do a supply drive, something like that, those are often seem to be more effective in the space. And I think also, especially, it's important to think about if an artist isn't the one who's coming to you with this cause and this enthusiasm, or even if they are, to really understand like what you are asking of the artist, or what's being asked of that artist by management, by the org itself, what those expectations are and how to fulfill them, so that you as the tour manager can help the artist to achieve those goals and to be a good ally to that organization. And then I think that the another dynamic that is really important in all of this is to make sure that the artists and the organizations each have appropriate expectations of each other, because on tour in music there's a certain culture, there's a certain way that things are done that also exists and is different in the activist space, and specifically also in activist spaces that are run by communities that your artists might not be a part of, like POC organizations, etc. It's important to make sure that you all are, communicating clearly of what's expected, what's most beneficial, and what can be done and achieved, and really working to move towards those goals specifically.
And would you say that it's like let those kinds of organizations take the lead? Right?
Yeah,
it's like you may have good intentions, but they may not want that.
Yeah, what's that saying? The road to hell is paved in good intentions. Yeah, no, I mean it, and in this industry, you really know that like what matters ultimately is whether or not you put on a good show. And so what matters with these organizations similarly is whether or not you put on a good effort, a good activation to support their cause. And so especially if you're working, I mean, any organization really, but especially if you're working with an organization that isn't a part of your own community personally, you really need to be involving that organization or people from the community that you're trying to serve in the project that you're doing, to make sure that it's not just you coming in and telling another group what they need, because that is not only frowned upon, it's ineffective. Like let activists who know the cause dictate what you do to the extent that that's possible.
Yeah. And also going into what Lori had mentioned, that nonprofits are often perceived as extra, and they're not always treated professionally. And I think it would be, touching on like what resources, like what you can think about to help them exist, like if they come to the venue to set up, like what you can do to help them be treated professionally.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a thing that I've seen before in the industry with, oh, the nonprofit needs this or what have you, and it's so disrespectful because this is something that that the organization has decided to do with a group that are there generally on their own time, at their own expense, and in a way that greatly benefits, the community that you're serving and the artists, and the artists, like PR or whatever. Like it being affiliated with these organizations is a way in which the artists are being served. And so if you don't treat the nonprofits like a part of your production, you're failing them and you're failing your artists in the way that you would be failing any vendor at the show if you weren't treating them with respect and giving them what they need to succeed.
And I think that something that both of you guys mentioned yesterday was it can also be as simple as like making a mention on social media, like you would just do with any other campaign, like with a sponsor, or with like, oh, more tickets are on sale, like, getting your artist to tweet or.
Yeah, absolutely. And it depends on the size of the artist. If the artist is running their own socials, sometimes that can be easier or harder. It could be anything in terms of, marketing and giving those organizations shout outs. And especially if you're doing, because there are so many different ways that a nonprofit activation at a show can manifest, whether, you know, if it's a clothing drive or something like that, it's extremely important for your artist to be advertising that that's happening. If they aren't posting about it, fans won't know to bring stuff, and then your thing will be a failure, and that matters too. And, you know, you as the tour manager on the ground with the artist in front of you have a bit more power than, you know, an email or a ping from, you know, a distant marketing department or what have you, in terms of enforcing, you know, like an obligation to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just to add to it, it just goes back to our checklist. Like, let's go back to some of our earlier webinars. Like, this is just something that falls on the tour manager's plate. Like, if this is something that your client is doing and it is a big integral part of your show, like, that is something on our list. Like, we have to make sure our artist is engaging, which they can get distracted at times and want to just work on their music, and it's up to us to kind of keep them on schedule. So that's a big part of it, and working with these teams. So
yeah, and the more, like, Elise just commented something really great about how it was, you know, when the artist publicly acknowledges the organization, that's a huge amount of validation for these people who are volunteering and who are trying to make the world better. So the more that can happen, you know, whether that's on social media, if that can happen from the stage, yeah, let's, you know, like, be a part of that as the tour manager. That's a huge way that you can benefit the nonprofit awareness.
Lori, can we talk about fundraising and how in coming to the concerts and coming to the tours, how you know, how organizations like Plus One work to help to finance this activism?
Yeah, sure thing. I mean, at the end of the day, a nonprofit is still a business. They still have to pay their staff, their travel fees, and setting up a concert is not a free engagement for them. They definitely have hard costs to cover, and they are looking to raise money to continue to do the good work that they're doing and elevate the work that they do. So a huge part of us when we started building out Participation Row was really thinking through ways that we can help cover the costs. It's also something Headcount simply just thought about in our own engagement and our own activation. If we're gonna go do voter registration at a music festival and we have to fly 3 staff members down, that's a huge cost, and we need to really think about the benefits of doing so. And so what we oftentimes think about is what's the best way to fundraise and cover the cost for these organizations. And that oftentimes has to do with the engagement of the artist, has to do with the type of audience that you are working with. So a couple of different ways that we've gone about it includes an amazing organization called Plus One. And basically what they do is they work with the artist directly to basically add $1 onto ticket sales. For each ticket, there's an additional $1 that gets put towards the nonprofit organization. We oftentimes do that to help cover the costs of putting some nonprofits on the road on a tour, which can be pretty expensive because they have to travel too. They got to get in their own van and go from city to city. There are other opportunities that involve fundraising and silent auctions. For example, bands like Phish and the Grateful Dead have a huge audience that loves memorabilia. And specifically, the Grateful Dead has a pretty wealthy audience. And so in those spaces, it's really a great opportunity for us to do things like silent auctions that raise the money for the nonprofits. We always try and make sure that we are at least covering the cost of them setting up at the event. But if we get lucky, like we have a few times, then we're sending them home with some real income. At the Dead 50 concerts, we raised over $750,000 for the nonprofits via auction items, which was really incredible. We basically sent each nonprofit home with almost the income to cover a new staff member for a year. Which is amazing. And then other ways that we think about it is doing things with organizations like Propeller or Omaze, which does fundraising and general activation work, sort of in the background, giveaways, you know, flyaways to shows or events. And oftentimes what that requires is some contribution from the festival or the tour itself for a meet and greet or some cool activation. But at the end of the day, we need to make sure that coming to these events is a real benefit for the nonprofits, and also a low lift for the tour, because there's a lot of work being done on that tour just to make the shows happen. So if we can help balance that out, then it's going to be a real win-win for all.
Right. I've actually done I've done several tours with Plus One and with several artists, and it's a breeze. You know, they do all the legwork for you, including all the settlement for the shows. And the great thing, in my experience, about Plus One is that they allow the artists to choose the cause or the initiative or whatever it is, the charity that they want to contribute to. So it gives the artist ownership. It gives the artist a hand in deciding where the money from their tour goes. And I've seen it on numerous tours, making really, to my eyes, significant contributions to these organizations. And it could be anything from a large global or charity or organization down to something local on a local level in their own community. So I think that's a really great thing for the artist, and my experiences have just been super easy and positive with Plus One.
But you know, Laurie, I'd love to dive into a little bit of the experience with Headcount. I've had very fortunate to have firsthand account working for Headcount, which was some of the first work I ever did. And for our watchers here, I met Laurie when I literally first started working, literally at my first gig ever in music. So she was like one of the first people I ever drove at a festival. And so it's been almost 10 years now that we've known each other.
Hangout Fest, where I missed my flight and needed a special ride.
I came in and got you over to the Hangout Fest, and would get opportunities to work with Headcount. And you kind of set me up on that. So that was kind of a fun experience, getting to engage and be on the festival site and engage with fans. And now, you know, fast forward 10 years, you know, this past tour, I was lucky to have Headcount join us on tour. So I know that you've spoken a little bit about engagement, maybe kind of pass it to you a little bit, how y'all's process is on evolving and transitioning into tours. And then I'll talk a little bit about my experience with working with you guys.
Yeah, sure. So fundamental core of Headcount is that we have volunteers across the country. And so when an artist that we're working with goes on tour, we like to basically reach out and say, hey, you're going to be on tour. Here are the cities on that tour. We have teams, and what we'd love to do is set up a table and register voters. The key for us is making it as simple as possible for the tour itself. And so what we ensure that we do is we simplify our needs. So basically our ask of the tour is, in these cities, we want to bring in 2 to 4 volunteers, and we need a setup for a table. And that's it. And we typically work with the tour manager to either incorporate that into their advance, or if they can send something blanket to all the venues saying we've approved Headcount to be here, we're happy to work with the venues directly to advance those credentials and that space. And then beyond that, we bring our fully trained team leader position, which is our leadership position in each city, in to train the volunteers they have with them that night and handle any sort of setup, takedown. The key is, don't bother the tour. Be as simple as possible, be friendly, make friends with the venues. And really it's helped grow the organization so much over the years. You know, by now we have worked and set up tables in venues in all of the key cities across this country. The venues know our teams, the tours know our teams. So it's a pretty seamless operation for us. We know where we're going to set up, we know who to talk to. And it allows for us to not be a hindrance on the tour, but be able to do really strong work as an organization.
I think it's just been wonderful. You know, our camp's management worked for a company called Madison House. I know Leah had spoken on a little bit. They're more of kind of like a 360 company. They manage the acts like the String Cheese Incident, who's heavy engaged with Headcount and the Disco Biscuits and stuff like that. And just through that note alone, getting them onto the touring process has been seamless almost. It was very kind of behind the scenes, very kind of like what you were saying. We just need very minimal needs. And then on my side of things, just making sure they're advanced and keeping the venues updated and so on and so forth. It's a pretty simple process. Just adding it to the advance and keeping everyone in the know, and then just having artists kind of pop down and engage with headcount from time to time and engage with voters. So it was a very kind of positive experience overall, but they definitely need our help, and they are a part of our tour. Don't ever think they're not. Even, you know, market to market, even though they're not living on the bus, they are, you know, in most situations, it is very locally volunteer ran, that they are very much a part of our tour. And kind of crossing over, Leah, I'd like to discuss a little bit about the advance with nonprofits. You know, nonprofits as businesses, the professionalism around nonprofits and advance and stuff like that. Would you like to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, totally. So I think that a role that we need to remember that we're in when we're working with nonprofit organizations that aren't like the cream of the crop, top 2 to 3 organizations that do this all the time, like Headcount, that are very oriented to what a show is like. It's important to remember that part of our role is as teachers, and that if a local organization reaches out to you, these may be high school students who've never done a table before, or they may be, recently retired folks who haven't been to a concert in the past 20 years or things like that. And so it's important to let them know exactly what infrastructure they're going to have, what infrastructure they're going to bring, or they're going to need to bring, and also with as much advance notice as possible, because they have to organize volunteers, which is its own, chasing cats situation, what the time commitment is to participate at your event. And so for me, in working with bringing nonprofits out to shows, it's been a healthy mix of working with Headcount, working with Conscious Alliance, which is an amazing hunger relief nonprofit that if you all haven't looked up, you should definitely check that out in addition to Headcount, and have them at your shows. But for organizations that are less experienced, after I get on that call and I establish that, yes, you have a mission and an engagement plan for the fans that makes sense, that will actually be beneficial to your organization, and we have a basic agreement about what that's going to look like. I'm sending an email, 3 weeks out with, if possible, with this is the rough time commitment that you're looking at. Here's what you can expect from me, that type of information before they ask for it, just so that they are prepared, just like any vendor, to come out and to be equipped to handle the crowd. And then I send arrival instructions with additional details, usually because I'm working on a lot of large one-offs the night before arrival, because I'm already at the venue, and often I'm able to send them a picture of their actual space so that they can plan appropriately.
Nice.
Do you want me to screen share the examples that you sent?
Yeah.
Okay, let me share this here. So Leah sent over just a couple of examples. Oh, whoops, this is the one
list,
for...
deadline, and details would be good to start from. And these are, I keep these templates permanently as just a part of advancing any show to make sure that I'm covering all of the questions that these nonprofits are otherwise going to ask me, and have this email to refer them back to. And
okay, sorry, that took a minute. Okay,
there you go.
See that? There we go.
Great,
awesome. And so the idea is that, you're telling them everything that they need to know, keeping it incredibly simple. This is when it is. This is when I need your names for the list by. And even if you're allocating them wristbands, especially with a nonprofit as a vendor, it's good to just know the names of everybody who's coming in under that banner and have that somewhere in your world. And I tell them when they're going to get their arrival instructions. It is last minute, but when they have the time commitment, they don't need to know where to drive in advance. And also explaining like why they need to be there at the time that they're there. Often nonprofits, like other vendors, are late. So this is why you need to arrive at the time that you need to arrive. And then listing to the best of my ability what the resources are that would be available at the venue for them. Sometimes people need to borrow a folding table from their neighbors or something like that. Because just remember that nonprofits are trying to operate as cheaply as possible in order to conserve funds for addressing their issues. Oh, and then there's also a note in here about doing an activation with Propeller, similar to what Lori's been talking about. So I like really ship those relationships with organizations like that to do fundraising or engagement type opportunities at the show if it's a large production. And arrival instructions.
Oh, do you want me to switch to the day before, or?
Arrival instructions is great.
Oh, arrival instructions. Yep. Yeah. Okay, here we go.
Cool. Yeah. And then this is just your basic like load in information. I don't think that this is all that unfamiliar from corresponding with any other vendor. You just have to remember that these are individuals, not necessarily professionals, and give them the information that they need to contact you to show up on time. A Google pin if you're working a stadium show and they're not coming in the exact public main entrance, please give them like a pin and specific instructions, and be patient if they get a little bit lost, because navigating back behind large venues is challenging if you've never done it before. Cool, awesome. And then I guess the last thing is that I really try to itemize everything that they're going to need to be in that area, especially at smaller shows where it might be difficult to get lighting. They might not be right next to an outlet. Just tell them to bring an extension cord. Tell them to bring a lamp. Like equip them to be well lit and as successful as possible, and make sure that they know if they need to also, if they have a banner, if they need to bring something to hang it from, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Just think about it from the perspective of if you were putting on that booth, if you were doing a booth for something in your, in your issue area or whatever you're a fan of, and what you would need to make it awesome. Help them do that.
Cool.
That's great. I think the key point to take from that is not to assume knowledge.
Yes.
We on the tour side have a certain way of working, and we can kind of get into a bit of a tunnel on that. And these people, like you said, they're volunteers. They don't know our world maybe at all, or maybe they've only done this at one or two shows, and they don't know our processes and our terminology and our ways of working. So in the easiest way to avoid issues with that is to explain it before the fact, rather than any issues coming up and then explaining it, or people getting lost, or people standing in the way of a forklift or something like that, So I think it's best to get out in front of these issues potentially, and just give as clear an overview of the situation that they're going to be walking into as possible.
For sure. And on that note, Lori, can you actually touch on how volunteers are interacted with? And then in terms of communication on day of show, and then also I thought of how are they vetted, right? So how do we make sure that we don't have some crazy psycho fan coming to volunteer for a show? And then what happens? What's the process if something goes wrong, or if they end up backstage somewhere? Can you just speak to that a little bit? You're muted, by the way.
Sorry about that. Headcount's very much a volunteer-run organization, and on the local nonprofit side, we're really an organization built on fans. They are fans of the music. They are people that want to be at the concerts, but also want to engage and do good. So I've certainly seen a wide breadth of what can go wrong with volunteers, and troubleshooting what that looks like. And really what we've done over the years to drive improvement in volunteer selection and what that looks like is certainly refining our application to specifically ask volunteers about their experiences. What are your favorite bands, et cetera, et cetera. It's good to know who's the, diehard and who isn't. You know, when you're volunteering at a show, you're not necessarily going to see the whole show. You're not necessarily going to get to go enjoy it. So it's really important to drive home to the volunteers that, you know, if you want to come to the show to see it, you should go to the show to see it, because you might have to do some work while the band is playing. Another big part of how we drive professionalism with our volunteers is really just driving the opportunity for those that have shown that they're great and capable and amazing. So for a very coveted tour, we're likely going to select a variety of volunteers that have volunteered with us before. We have a volunteer rating system. So whoever is choosing those volunteers can select to have people that have really high ratings, who have done this multiple times before, who you know understand the rules and regulations of what's going on. We encourage people to start by volunteering at smaller shows. Volunteer at some of these like lower level events that maybe aren't getting a ton of volunteer signups, or our community events, which are super important, but don't have that like sexy free concert ticket attached to it. So if you can get people that want to go to the community events and still engage, it sort of heightens your opportunity to be at the coveted shows. And then we really drive from within. Any sort of upward mobility within headcount is often driven from our volunteers. We elevate our top volunteers to the roles of the people that go on tour. We elevate them to our staff level. They're the ones that are going to be first in line to get paid positions, more exciting opportunities, and to be really put into spaces that they want to be in. So volunteer selection is really important. And I think incentivizing personal growth within the space has been a real key for us in terms of ensuring that we have really great people out there. We certainly have had some nightmare situations before. I've definitely had a volunteer that found himself backstage. And that definitely requires a really honest conversation with the tour and the management. It requires a really honest conversation with the venues, anyone that was involved. And then we have a very stern conversation with the volunteers as well. We have quite a few policies set in place where if we find a volunteer doing something out of order with headcount, you're dealing with legal documents. So our volunteers have to be totally sober anytime they're working at the show. And if we catch a volunteer that's doing something out of line, we very specifically like cut off their wristband, whatever it is that got them access to that space, it's removed and they're removed from the venue itself. And then that's noted in that volunteer rating. So they're not likely to get chosen ever again. So yeah, dealing with volunteer issues and managing them it's a challenge. And it's also something that you have to sort of accept. It's not always going to be perfect because you're working with unpaid volunteers and there's only so much that you can control in those spaces. So you try and set up and play offense as much as possible, but also just be prepared with good processes and systems when something goes wrong.
And just out of curiosity, have any of your volunteers ever jeopardized the relationship you have with the artist?
Yes.
How has that been handled to you?
We've certainly had that happen before. Typically what has come out of that situation is a conversation with the artists themselves, the artists and their management, about new regulations we'll set for that tour. Sometimes it means that every time there's going to be a show, we have a call with the entire volunteer team, telling them exactly what the rules are, exactly what they cannot do. And we just commit to making those phone calls on a regular basis and speaking with everyone. Sometimes it means cutting down the number of volunteers that we have in a space. Sometimes it means that we have to change what the setup of the show itself is like. We've certainly had situations before where we had to transition to a space where the volunteers didn't get to see the show, but instead had to stay, for example, in the lobby and did not have access into the show area. So there's a lot of work that we were able to do to remedy those situations and those relationships, just to make sure that we were showing the artists and management how seriously we take it, how committed we are to actually doing the good work, and making sure that we want them to know that their experience from us is our priority.
That's really important. Everything in dealing with the volunteer aspect of it is really important because we're interfacing with these people on a day-to-day. And there's another aspect of this that is really important for everyone who's watching this and who is aspiring to be a tour manager. And it mainly comes up during festival season. You will quite often encounter shows that are produced to a very high level and are funded well, like you know, the artists may be getting paid the same or more to do a small regional show that has a decent sized stage, is well covered from an audio and lighting perspective, but you may well be working with a lot of volunteers in positions other than, you know, I've worked local festivals where only a couple of key positions are paid positions, and everything else, including stage manager, would, like local hands, certain other members of the key production crew are volunteers. So again, going back to what I was saying before, that our touring crew have their ways of doing things, and some people can be very set in their ways. It's really important that you communicate well with your team in advance if that is going to be the situation you're going into, and just caution them. And for anyone that watched our international touring webinars, where we kind of advise you to have a bit more patience and caution your team and be aware that when you go into other countries where English is not the first language, they're going to have to just employ a bit more patience when they're dealing with people who are working in their second language. And it's kind of the same thing when you're working with volunteers who are in a production, rather than, you know, just in maybe they have an activation on site, they might be working in a key production element, like a key production role, like a stage manager. You just have to make your team aware that this is a volunteer and you might need a little bit more patience today. And, you know, talking realistically, people might grumble, and some, you know, you might get complaints about this and this and this, but it's still their job and your job to get the show up and make sure the artist has the same experience. So there has to be a bit of coming and going, and if you're upfront with everyone and give them a heads up of what they're walking into, that generally has a much more positive effect than dealing with things as they come up. So that's something to be aware of. It will come up. It happens to me a lot up here in Canada, and 99 times out of 100, these are great people, and they're experienced. They're just helping out their local or charity organization or community organization, whatever it is. But sometimes you get somebody who has no idea what they're doing and probably shouldn't be near the stage, and you know, it just needs a bit of tact to get around that, so that everyone doesn't have a terrible 16-hour day when you're on site.
Yeah.
Speaking of festivals, on a slightly different note, Leah, you know, there's sometimes we've been talking about tours, but there's obviously one-off events, one-off shows, like the band comes in to do a festival, or sometimes people do large one-off, not like the Live Aids or, you know, like Global Citizen, but like large one-off non-cause based shows. So we had an interesting conversation during our prep yesterday about festivals, which I didn't actually know, but you having been on the festival side, you know, gave us some good information that, like, if an artist wants to do something or tie in, like, to go for it.
Yeah, so totally go for it. It's so funny. I think that, you know, without violating any sort of contract that I've signed, I can say universally from like all the festivals that I've worked on the back end of, often in a role that at least touches, if not manages, like the nonprofit and community engagement aspects of the event. We are thrilled when an artist reaches out and says, hey, I care about this and I want to do something. We're always looking for, and you may not see this so much in a tour manager role as you do in like a manager or marketing role, but festival marketing teams are always looking for a reason to talk about an artist that isn't just the same old, like, you know, they have a new album up. Here is the art that we created that has their picture on it. Here is a picture of them. You know, like these types of basic things. Like, we're looking for the reasons that our event is unique, and we're looking for the reasons that people should, you know, care and engage in advance. So the idea of, and this has happened to me a couple of times, of an artist reaching out and saying, look, I really care about it. For example, like, I really care about rape survivors. And I've just learned that like when a woman is raped in her bed, that she needs to give her sheets up as evidence. And that police departments or whatever, or not, maybe it's not police departments, it's like local organizations that support that have need sheets for these victims. And I want to correct myself that a victim of rape or sexual violence does not have to be male, does not have to be female. They can be male, they can be non-binary, etc. But for a victim, taking care of like something so simple as sheets, and even in a small tour, much less a big tour, you can say, hey, like, hey fans, or hey festival, I want to do a sheet drive. I want to do a food drive. I want to do, you know, like, I care about that your area was hit by a hurricane last year and that people are still struggling to like have whatever it is, you know, you can reach out with your ideas or your cause area to brainstorm with the festival. And obviously, of course, you know, if you're working with an artist who has, you know, a really involved or any sort of team besides you want to be talking to the manager, you want to be talking to the digital team, anybody who would be a stakeholder in pulling something like this off and representing it really well. But by all means, if your artist is engaged and ready to do something at a festival and you want to do more and you have the capacity for that, as an organization, hit up the festival, you know, give them an idea, tell them what you're willing to do. And that's pretty awesome. And honestly, I'd love to see artists doing more of that and being the invitation for a festival to have a greater positive impact.
Right. And just to give an example of that, of what that could mean in practical terms, I worked with an artist who last year put on their own festival in a community in Canada with an incredibly underprivileged Indigenous community there. And they involved them at every level of the festival building. So design, marketing, booking. In the artist liaison, there were people shadowing our crew on site, and there were performers given prime time headline slots in between the other more well-known artists. So I think that was all the artists doing. That didn't come from management, didn't come from us. They were proactive on that front, and it was an incredible event to be a part of, and it really took it beyond just putting their name to something, because they really tried to involve people in every part of the process, and try and impact people to have some skills to take it beyond that and be able to hopefully have a bit more access to this side of the industry.
And I want to add on too, I think for festivals, it's so important to remember that a festival is bringing something into a community, and their relationship with that community is really, really important. And so oftentimes when we're running participation rows at festivals, we have a very frank conversation at the very beginning about how much of that participation row they want to have actually be dedicated to local organizations. It's really important for that community festival relationship to be really positive. And a huge part of that can be bringing in those local nonprofits and organizers, making sure they have a really positive experience, making sure they're taking away amazing benefits that they're going to then bring back into that local community.
And speaking about local communities, Leah, talking about the large one-off shows, if your artist is going in to do like a big one-off at the local arena, It's like their big Halloween show or something. That's a perfect chance to bring in those local orgs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that with a large one-off or a special event, there's more of a call to do more and to have a bigger impact with those. So I mean, for me, in looking at a large one-off and what we want to do and impact, you could even start by, if the artist is really engaged, literally asking the fans in that area, hey, what are the local organizations that you like? We want to do a drive. We want to do a clothing drive, or we want to do a drive for something. We want to collect supplies for something. What are the needs in your community, and starting there, or just getting online. Most nonprofit entities have a website, and many of them have a wish list, and seeing what those opportunities are, vetting with your artist what you want to collect for. It can be as fluffy as, like toys for Christmas, which Adrienne was talking about when we were chatting earlier, or it could be something really intense like my rape victim sheet example, or you could fall in between. But whatever those potential needs are in the community, kind of talking to the artists about that, and then going to that organization themselves and saying, hey, we want to do this. Are these the supplies that you actually need? i.e., is your website updated? Because that's often usually maintained by a volunteer as well. So research, vet with artists, talk to the local orgs, and come up with a plan to do a supply drive. And also, once you have what you're doing, the next question is how you're doing it. So in thinking about, like, Conscious Alliance again is a good example. On one of the events that I did, we were doing like little lunch boxes instead of posters like they usually do. And we had to think through with the security team, okay, well, these metal lunch boxes that folks are bringing like 20 cans of food to a booth outside of Search, outside of the venue, dropping them off, getting the lunchbox. And now they're standing in front of this venue wanting to go inside with this lunchbox in their hands. We need to make sure that those lunchboxes are allowed through the Search, because local security personnel may not necessarily have either the orientation to what's happening or the expectation that something like that is normal to bring in a venue. And so it's thinking about the entire operation from soup to nuts. Again, imagine that you're a fan coming to participate, and what are you producing? What is your experience all the way into the venue, all the way into the show, all the way through the night? And how can you make sure that goes super well for them? And then one other thing that I want to say is, like, I've done supply drives in 500 cap rooms. And those have also been effective and also influential to those venues that I'm doing those supply drives in. If you take a local organization and do something really good for them in a venue, the venue staff often pays attention and wants to do that again for their own reasons of being good humans, but also for the same reasons of PR and wanting to be a pillar of the community. So don't hesitate, if you're not talking about some 10, 20, 30 cap event, to still want to still invest in that type of work.
That's really, it takes us right into sort of how we want to chat a little bit about, to you, Lori, and to you, Leah, about things that can be done on tour that are not, you don't have to be a big festival or a great sized event to do something like this. So can we talk a little bit about the things that we can do on tour? I also would like to open this up a little bit to our esteemed viewing panel, because we always have some great folks who join us. You all know who we're talking about, who are, a little more seasoned in touring and have some ideas about things that we do on the regular basis. Like yesterday, we spoke a little bit about the toiletry collection that we do for the homeless organizations, and how you know, we encourage folks to bring their small mini-sized toiletries from the hotel that they don't use to us in the production office, and we carry a bin. And depending on whether or not the bin gets filled up quickly, how long the tour is, or where we are, we find places in local markets to donate. Maybe that's a women's shelter, maybe that's a homeless shelter, perhaps it's an organization that works with fortifying folks who are going out into the job market again, or something like that. So let's open that chat up and talk about things we can do, whether the tour is large or small.
Thanks. I'll just second what Lisa actually mentioned in the chat feature, which is a great organization. An example of this is Reverb. While they do a bunch of organizing of nonprofits, a huge chunk of their work happens behind the scenes. And what they're doing is working with artists to rethink their riders, to rethink the way that they're touring, to become more environmentally friendly. A tour can certainly take on a lot of resources, and there are so many simple ways that you can just rethink what you're providing. When you rethink your rider and look for more sustainable options, you're really forcing the venue to also rethink where they're sourcing things on a regular basis. It could lead to long-lasting change, not just for your tour, but for the places that you're going to. So thinking about just the functionality and the operations and assessing the impact of every step of that tour, and whether or not there are just simple changes you can make along the way.
Absolutely. I've been, speaking from venue side, I've seen the Jack Johnson tour come through and the venue be different and more sustainable afterwards. So that actually does happen.
In what kind of way? What kind of changes did you see?
Reduction of plastics. I think that they actually started, I think that another one that he does, I might be misconstruing his rider with something else, was that recycling cans next to every trash can, things like that, where it's just, you know, making green choices more accessible. It seemed to be the overriding prerogative of those changes, and the tour did it, or the venue did it, and A, why would they undo it, and B, they want to be greener anyway. We all know that we have to, so that was motivation.
It's the adapt or die mentality. It's kind of like, well, if this is going to be a new implementation and more tours are starting to come through this, why would we go backwards? You know, there was half the tour that I did earlier this year didn't have anything recyclable or anything green in it, but we helped them every step of the way. And, you know, when I'm at settlement, they were like, yeah, we're going to keep it like this, and we're going to be more accessible for green initiatives and stuff for future tours and stuff like that. So it does go a long way, kind of pushing that the new rider goes a long way in changing that up. So
right, that's true. And we definitely have seen a shift in how we operate with regards to green touring and some of the sustainability efforts that we've seen venues adopt, similar to what Leah said about Jack Johnson. We've gone through, and now more venues are in fact using dolphin pumps as opposed to flats of water bottles and things like that. I definitely wanted to just, open up a different screen. Sorry guys, my fingers are doing the talking. We talked a little bit about the toiletries. It was interesting when we were talking about supply and drive collection coordination. We talked about also needing to, if you're going to do that, again, depending on the size of your tour, you're going to need a collection area for these, you know, if you're doing a food drive, maybe it's during Thanksgiving time or holiday season, a lot of local organizations, and this is great to team up with them, right? We talked about local organizations doing food drives. We talked about the USMD, the Marine Corps does a toy drive every year, and they'll rock up in their dress blues and they need a table and some access, and they'll come and do a toy drive and take those away. Can you guys think of maybe some other things that smaller tours?
Something, just to chime in, that I've done on a small tour last year with an artist I GM'd was we had everyone or anyone who had a disability come up to the front, because we did smaller captive venues. Normally they would be in the back. And so we just made sure there was an exit accessible if needed be, but anyone in a wheelchair, anyone on crutches, and it made such a difference to the environment of the show to be more inclusive of people with disabilities.
So instead of using whatever ADA seating had been delineated, you guys moved them to some prime viewing area.
Yeah.
Nice. That's very cool. That's very cool.
No, Henry had just, oh
Henry,
yeah,
we were looking at
Henry put it in the chat,
Henry.
and I think it's such a great idea that for his crew, that they made it so that any crew guest list requests would be approved for sure if they did a donation to a charity of their choice or one that the tour was supporting, which is
and you're
really
starting
cool.
to see that, and you're starting to see that more as a norm with music festivals too. If you have like a family guest or you're tied to the production company in any way, they'll do donation-based charity for guest passes, which has become more of a normal thing these days.
And some of them are pretty significant. Like I seem to remember Glastonbury being one of the earliest adopters of that. I think it was like £40, which is kind of in the region of like $60-70 per. And if you think of the amount of artists across a weekend who will have guests, that really can add up to a significant amount of money.
Yeah, they're usually going to a really great local charity. And if you can imagine how many guests of family members and stuff at all these music festivals, it probably adds up pretty quick, you know? So just from the guest side, you know, they're seeing a pretty big chunk going to charity each year for these festivals.
Right.
And on the tour side as well, you know, Just a Bunch of Roadies, which Adrian mentioned, I mean, they did a lot of big stuff, but they're really very much advocates for finding, you know, if you have an off day and, you know, your whole crew wants to go find a local organization to do a service day for.
Right.
You know,
There's
and
plenty of painting that can be done. We did, with JBOR, we did a day of service at a food bank, and we took probably 50 people over there, and we sorted through 30,000 pounds of food. And the gentleman painted bumpers and repaired, you know, things that needed to be repaired.
They couldn't believe it, because it was literally a bunch of roadies, and we organized their entire warehouse that day. They were like, oh my God, you just got to the end of the warehouse.
So days of service to be done on days off.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a really great organization that works specifically with tours, and they've worked with media, really tours of all sizes, to do action days, usually in collaboration with a local POC or Indigenous-led organization. They're called Permaculture Action Network. They've done some really great stuff with Rising Appalachia. I did an event with them last year that was digging garden beds and building infrastructure alongside a women of color run organization. And they're another really fantastic org that I recommend if your artists are down to get out there with fans and get their hands dirty, maybe play some acoustic music, and just, you know, have a day where they're real humans and they're out in nature and all of that, all those things that we miss when we're on the road. That's a pretty great organization. I'll put it in chat what the organization is, and I'll link to them. That's Permaculture Action Network.
And I know, actually, unless anybody else has any other examples, we could probably take a few questions. And I know Leah had earlier a point that also she wanted to talk about when we were talking about infrastructure, with like activists that have a little less infrastructure. We were talking about funding and stuff.
Yeah, so you may have seen me gnashing on cough drops throughout this. I'm in Portland, Oregon, and I've been participating in the anti-fascist resistance that's going on here right now. And a lot of the organizations here are, some of them are more established, but other ones are pretty ad hoc, but no less legitimate for them not having C3 status. When I was forming the C3 that I founded, it took almost a year to get our C3 status. And so, you know, if you're fundraising, that's one thing. But in terms of, you know, giving somebody a mic, doing a supply drive, like any other type of engagement with your organization, if that activist that you're working with or that organization that you're working with is something like, you know, Riot Ribs down in Portland, or an effort that is being pointed to by legitimate organizations to donate to the respirator fund for activists on the front lines in Portland or something like that, these don't discount them just because they don't have that stamp necessarily. Vet them, but don't say that you won't, you know, don't make a hard line of not ever working for or recommending organizations that aren't, you know, legitimate in the eyes of the government, because a lot of the best things that are happening in the world are happening outside of that scope.
That's for sure. That is for sure.
And as you said too, they could be in the process of becoming the 501c3, and like you said, it takes a really long amount of time. So vet them, but don't discount them.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. Do we have any questions, or anybody that wants to? Oh, Aaron just asked, will there be a list made of available the volunteer and activist organizations mentioned today? And yes, we will compile a list of resources that have been mentioned.
Does the panel think enough artists are raising their voices enough about our care of the planet? No, I think that artists are fundamentally neglecting the power that they hold to be a part of saving this planet and legitimizing our species' presence here. I think that we can do a lot more, and I think that they need to be hearing that from all corners.
That's a good point, and I think it speaks to something that, in my limited understanding of this, is a concern for artists because of the social media world that we live in and the polarized nature of everything and the politicization of everything. Artists are scared to, well, I'm not going to say all artists. Some artists are concerned about putting their head above the parapet because they get shot down for speaking their mind on anything. You know, like I said before, I'm very fortunate to work for some very socially aware artists, and no matter what they speak up on, guaranteed, if you look through their social media posts, there's just a ton of artists, of their fans, their own fans, who've chosen to engage with them on social media, saying, this is not your place to talk about politics. This is not your place to talk about the environment. This is not your place to talk about race. I mean, what the hell do you want your artists to talk about? That's exactly what art is for. That's what artists are for. That's such a non-argument. So I think it plays into artists thinking and management thinking, and some people shy away from issues like that just because of that.
The branding is a big part of an artist's growth these days, you know, and it's like what Doug was saying, it is so politicalized now that it's like they're treading on a thin line, you know, like if you do say one thing, it could literally dismantle your work, you know. So I feel like you see almost more kind of keeping their head out of it and just focusing on just building this kind of everything that's around their music and their movements and so on and so forth, pretty paper cut, but we should see more artists standing up, you know.
And frankly, music and some kind of activism have gone hand in hand for literally centuries.
Oh my God, I saw somebody the other day commenting on a post by Tom Morello, the guitarist from Rage Against the Machine, saying, keep politics out of your posts, Tom. Where the fuck have you been for the last 25 years? Seriously.
Rage Against the Dishwasher. I know.
Oh, man. Yeah, I mean, it is a challenge, and you do have to think about, you know, like, it can be really traumatic for an artist, especially an artist who isn't prepared for it, to speak out on an issue that, you know, is divisive. But we're at a point where, like, voting by mail is divisive, and I'm starting to see, you know, pushback against registering voters is divisive. And at a certain, you know, and I mean, at least for me and for the majority of my clients, at a certain point, you know, you gotta draw a line and use what you got to push back against these perceptions and this, you know, increasing suffering that we're experiencing with this, you know, hyperpolarization, and to model for other people what effectively engaging or what being a good person in this world looks like, because artists are also role models, and to be silent in a time when so many people are hurting is also a choice, you know, and one that you know, may not make you as much of a target on social media, but that is still harmful, especially to your marginalized fans who are being hurt by what's happening out there.
Hey, keep going, Laura.
I was just gonna add in a little caveat there too, though, that you know, I would argue that their platform is the strongest asset that an artist has to offer up to these organizations. But if they are in a position where they're hyper concerned about their brand or taking a really hard stance, there's still so many ways to support organizations. Like, that is not a reason to do nothing. That's a reason to then go to +1 and start doing that fundraising for the organizations instead. There's so much that can be done that doesn't have to be hyper public facing if that's not something that an artist is interested in doing. At the end of the day, an artist being behind the work that you're doing is the best asset you can have, and forcing them to drag their feet into something they're not comfortable with is not beneficial for everyone. So really thinking through what is the thing that they are passionate about and the best way for them to engage that makes them comfortable.
I had one last question as we're getting closer to closing here. This is kind of a question for Leah and Laurie. Is there anything on the innovation side that y'all have seen, kind of where we're at on engagement and activism and things that y'all have been excited about? And as a closing note, is there anything that our students, you'd like to leave with our students on the side of activism, and kind of a good segue out of a conversation that kind of can leave them thinking a little bit about activism and where we're at?
Yeah, one thing that I think that I've seen a lot out there that's been really fantastic is just bringing in new technology and digital integration with the work that we're doing on the ground. It offers a real storyline for the work that's happening over the course of a tour. It brings in an opportunity to bring in a fan base that can't make it to a show. Bring in the people that aren't going to be there physically. Right now, none of us are there physically. So, you know, engaging with fans in a way that is not just physical, but digital, and integrating the two together can really amplify the story and really elevate the nonprofit's work.
Yeah, that's super true. That expanding accessibility is also really exciting to me. I think that one of my favorite things that I've been seeing more and more of is artists, and also, you know, what we're doing here, honestly, the professionals and industries that traditionally have a really high barrier to access, specifically music, are looking at the power that they have in terms of who they talk to, who their collaborators are, who they're amplifying, who they're sharing their platforms with. Whether, I mean, right now that's on social media. We see, you know, like Lady Gaga is like, here, just take my Instagram account for this week and tell, you know, and teach us. We accumulate so much power, and then oftentimes we're pretty afraid to share it, and that's changing. And I think that, you know, artists looking at, okay, well, you know, if you're, you know, for example, an EDM producer, who are you sampling? Who are you featuring? How are you crediting them, etc.? Are you working with, you know, with youth of color? Are you teaching? Who are your opening acts, etc., all the way down the chain? Like, we have a relatively, insular industry that is really heckin' ripe for change, and there's a lot of power in our hands individually to do that. And I see more artists and more event professionals recognizing that and actively taking steps to make the next generation better for a more diverse group of artists and tour managers and everything. So that's really exciting for me. And so I think I would leave everyone here with the question of what more can you do to open your industry to people who are not you?
That's great. That's a good one. That's a good one to think of.
Wonderful way to close. And I learned so much today between you both, and couldn't have been happier to have you both on to talk about activism with us. And I know our students have learned a lot as well. Espinoza, thanks for joining us today, and look forward to having you back. And this Thursday, we will be joined by a manager. We'll just keep following on us with our social media, and we'll update everything for you guys. And this will be live on YouTube. So if you want to go back and rewatch, it's live on YouTube. And yeah, everyone have a great week. And thank you, everyone, for being with us today.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much. And we will put up resources and samples of Leah's advancing letters if you ever need them on our website. So look for those too.
Espy, Espy, was great to have you. Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Laurie. Thanks, Leah.
See you guys Thursday.
Bye.
Thanks.
The wave off. The wave off.
The Zoom wave off.